there were a couple of things that I wanted to talk about today. Uh, I have a list of several things. Uh, the first is really important that I'm going to ask you guys how you did. If you attend live, I am finding out that Canvas is still showing you that you need to submit something. And I tried fixing that. If I fix it from my end so you don't have to submit something, if you attended, it doesn't give you points. So if you are one of the people that attend live and it still shows up that you're supposed to submit something, go and just type in a capital Y and submit that, and it's fine. Okay? And then that will cover that. It is on my priority list of things to do, but it's like way down on the list. Like after cataloging all the different earwigs I find in my apartment over the last year and coordinating them by size, it's underneath that. But I will. And if you are showing up and only your initials are showing up, let me know your name. I have an initial of RK and LW. What's your name? RK?
That's Ryan.
Ryan, okay. How about the LW?
Leah, can you not see me?
No, it only shows up with it. Then oh, there we go. Leah Wood. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Yeah, and then the RK, that's Ryan. Okay. Thank you. I think today we're going to be about a half an hour or so, maybe a little bit longer. Did everybody have a nice weekend? It's starting to finally cool down a little bit, and it's kind of exciting to see rain. But the question is, where is it going to flood this time? And not, how much rain are we getting? I live by the municipal golf course, and they're dredging that out. So I guess it's a good thing because that helps to mitigate or control the floodwaters a little bit. But every time it rains, on one hand, it's really nice, and on the other hand, I'm wondering, whose carport is going to be washed away. So all you guys are safe though. Excellent, very nice. How was the last assignment?
I actually have a question.
Yes.
It's for last week. I was going to ask it before I forgot. So the project, I did it with my roommates, but I used the same object for all three of them. So do I have to put my experience for every single one, or can I just include it on one of them?
You have to do your experience for every single one because you did it 3 times.
Okay, thank you.
And one thing I'm noticing too is that some people are not including at the beginning of that. I say, ask them how they feel about it, but not tell you. And then at the end, I ask you to have them relate how their feelings changed, and just record that. That's part of the submission. Several people didn't get all the points because they forgot to include that. So make sure that you include that. That's a good question. Any other questions? One thing that you may be interested to do, again, way down on your priority list, but you guys have increased your understanding of the tools of artistic critique exponentially. And just it's interesting to go back and read comments from that very first discussion where you just try to make some sort of reference to it than what you guys are doing now, because you guys are actually, you're changing people's perceptions by asking them to look, to really observe what they're seeing. And I think that's really important. And can you see how this can apply to pretty much anything you do, this kind of critical thinking? Structured thinking allows us to behave as humans in an environment, in a physical environment, where a lot of insects, for example, have you guys ever heard of bottom-up programming? Bottom-up programming is essentially where instead of giving the system a list of requirements to follow, or a list of exercises to follow. You give the system a number of reactions. So if this happens, then you do this. If this happens, then you do this. And it's what's fascinating about that kind of programming is whatever the system is, if you do it in, for example, animation graphics, this is what they did for the big, huge power battle scenes at the keep towards the end of Two Towers, I believe it is, where all these orcs were battling and trying to defeat the people in the gigantic keep. The animation program was essentially, they did bottom-up programming for the animation. And what scientists are finding out is that this is replicating how insects behave and how small animals behave. Well, we're human beings, we're not animals. When we start actually thinking about how we think, and we actually are thinking with intent, then we demonstrate our humanity. And it's, I think it's a much more powerful way of dealing with the world. And it is empowering too. Have any of you had any experiences like on that order as you're dealing with this kind of stuff? Hopefully, as you become more familiar with tools of artistic critique and you're able to apply it to the different endeavors that you have, the different classes that you have, you will start seeing it, because I'm seeing it. And if you don't see it yourself, you will see it in the future. Let's see. What we're doing in this module that makes it a little bit different is we are taking some of those things that we've learned previously by applying the tools of artistic critique, and we're using those in critical or intentful thinking and examination of a specific kind, not a kind of art, but art from a specific area and group of people over a specific time period. The general time period is 13th to the 15th century, and the group of people for this module is the people that were kind of united under the old Mali Empire. What is really interesting is when you are doing this kind of intentful thinking with what you observe, as you're processing it, you're going to be able to articulate why different things seem to feel like they belong together. And you're going to be able to articulate why and describe why things actually seem to be related. So particularly what we're going to be looking at is something called Equestrian Rider, is the style of the statue. And what these are is statues usually out of terracotta. And terracotta is a word for clay that art people use to show off our education. We can't just say clay because that would be pedestrian. Everybody says clay. When we say terracotta, it means that we've gone to university and know what we're talking about. So when you describe clay as an artsy-fartsy type person, remember, what word are you supposed to use? Anybody?
Terracotta.
Excellent. Very good. That is exactly right. Because just the way, when you use that in a sentence, it makes you sound at least 10 IQ points smarter. So good tool to have. What you'll see, have you ever been in a situation where you can see that things are similar, but you can't quite describe why they're similar? Have you had that experience? One of the great benefits of being able to use these 4 steps of artistic critique is that you are able to actually describe to somebody else why these things are similar, and you're going to be able to actually write down why they're similar and point out the similarities. If somebody tells you, this is art from the Southwest, there's a certain kind of aesthetic that kind of ties it together. Plains Indian art, same kind of thing. There's a certain aesthetic. The Plains nations. If somebody tells you this comes from India, there's a certain aesthetic, or Turkish painting, there's a certain aesthetic. With the tools of artistic critique, you'll be able to describe what that aesthetic is. We're also going to be examining or have an introduction to the 7 elements of art. These are the 7 things that have, it doesn't really matter, I think, what order they're in. The reason why they're in the order that they are for this module is because that was the order of the 3-minute videos I sent everybody, pretty much. Those 7 different elements are line, shape, form, texture, value, color, and space. As you are creating visual art, you use these elements to make whatever it is that you're making. And this is true regardless of which medium you're working in. But what's nice about this is learning about these things, watching those videos, and having that vocabulary under your belt. You will be able to better articulate your expression and use of the 4 tools of artistic critique. Instead of saying, this object looks angry, you can say, the shapes of the lines in this object and the tools used to make those lines make it look like it was done quickly and with a lot of harsh energy, leading the viewer to believe potentially that this was either done in anger or is done to portray the emotion of anger. Can you see how that's different from just saying, yeah, it looks like the guy's mad? That's where we're going with this. So in this module, you're going to look at the 7 elements of art. You're going to remember those 4 tools of artistic critique. Anybody want to list what those 4 tools are? And you can name different ones. What's the first one? Description. Great. What's the second one?
Analyze.
Yes, excellent. Perfect. What's the third one?
Interpret?
Yes, exactly. And what's the last one?
Judgment.
Yes, very good. Judgment. When you learn about the 7 elements of art and couple that with those 4 steps, you're going to be able to see why things are similar and describe them to somebody else, right? Maybe the same people that you used for the project on the previous module. What I have is a few different websites where you look at art from different areas in that time period of the old Mali Empire. And you'll see that there is a common form in a lot of these things called the Equestrian Rider, where it's basically a dude on a horse. And there's some things that you'll notice that they feel very similar. And I want you to apply these 7 elements and those 4 steps of a critique so you can describe to yourself why they are appearing similar, why they feel like they're related to each other. And then you're going to learn a little bit about collages, and you're going to make your own collage that is your version of that Mali Equestrian Rider. And we'll talk about that a little bit too. 2 things that I wanted to discuss in relation to that. First is, do you think that our ancestors, when you see really old art, it usually doesn't look like we do today, does it? Maybe there's a lot of distortion, that people don't look exactly like people. Have you noticed that about really old art? Do you think that's because those people were dumber than us and just didn't know how to do it? Or do you think they did it on purpose?
I feel like it was a little bit of both.
I think that there is something to be said about not having all the tools that we have today. Did you know that before about 300 BC, nobody on the planet had a word for blue? Did you know that? If you look at old Greek writings, they talk about the wine dark sea. or the expansive sky, or the sunlit sky, or the sun-filled sky. They don't use the word blue. And it makes me wonder, we talked a little bit about not being able to see something unless we had some sort of a framework for it. And I wonder if that's the case there. So I think Allison, that is a really good point. For the most part, I believe that it wasn't because they were ignorant or stupid. It was because there were different things that were important to them. Do any of you follow any models on Instagram? Like any beauty posts or anything like that? One thing that I've seen my kids used to, my daughters used to, and then they stopped because they wanted to throw up. A lot of these people on Instagram use filters so that you're not seeing the actual person. You're seeing what they look like with their eyes 5% bigger, or with all the pimples gone, or with the colors smoothed out, or whatever it is. You're not seeing the actual person. Because those filters that person uses are the things that person chooses to emphasize about their own physical appearance that it's important to them. And our ancestors did have the capability of drawing or painting things incredibly realistic. There's Egyptian tomb paintings that are 3,500 years old, where it shows the people, the Egyptians, where you see the full chest, their legs are to the side, their head is to the side. Can you imagine trying to walk around anywhere like that? All their hands, you can see every single one of their fingers all the time. But behind the people, you see a genre scene of women fishing along the banks of the Nile, or ducks and birds, other birds together, or a dog playing around. And it is incredibly realistic. There's nothing really stylized about it at all. Praxiteles was a Greek sculptor that did a lot of relatively very stylized human forms, but also almost photorealistic. And he was a Greek sculptor that lived thousands of years ago. And the proportions on the models that he created are still being used today to measure our standard of beauty in modern America. So, the realism was there. You look at Lascaux, cave paintings there, and the animal life there. Some of it is stylized, some of it is very naturalistic. But if you are doing something, for example, you're painting a portrait of a deceased relative. In the Eastern Mediterranean, about 2,000 years ago, one of the ways that they would dispose of bodies or show respect to bodies is you'd bury a person for about 2 years, then you dig their bones up and put the bones in an ossuary box. If you weren't rich enough to afford a plot of land to bury the body in, you would boil the body, basically, get the meat off and put the bone. Yes, disgusting. You don't want to put it on the stove next to the dinner you're making, because you don't want anybody confused when they go and get their food. But the boxes that the bones would be put in were called ossuary boxes. And then a lot of the times the families would have, or communities would have caves or areas where they would put these boxes in instead of burying the bodies. And that would be where your relative was laid to rest. And seeing in a lot of these Byzantine type portraits, they are stylized. Some of them look very naturalistic, but many of them are stylized. And I'm thinking that maybe the stylization is down to the features that were prominent that everybody in the family remembers. Like if you had a gigantic unibrow that everybody knew about, and this was common for people in that area, that's a big thing that would stick out in your portrait. Or if you had, one of those soul patch type beards, I remember seeing an image of that. Somebody could only grow a beard right there. And so that was on their portrait. Where everything else seems kind of bland, but the specific feature that everybody in the family remembers the deceased by, that's the part that shows up in the portrait. Or you look at images of saints where the men and women are pretty much standardized, except for the accoutrements around them. Like Mary is always shown wearing a blue robe and lilies and having lilies. Different saints have different things. Like I think it was Saint Sebastian is shown with arrows. Saint Teresa is shown with a golden arrow, and she's usually wearing really dark indigo or black robes. But each person has very specific traits that mark them, so you can use a standardized image, but everybody can recognize who it is because you're picking out the features that are important. And so that leads me to believe that our ancestors artists did things not because they were ignorant or stupid necessarily, but because they were doing things to specifically communicate important points. One of the assumptions some people have made is that religious art in Great Britain or in Britain during the 16th century, during the dissolution of the monasteries, they had no idea of history because it would show Jesus and the Roman soldiers wearing contemporary outfits. And or they would show contemporary landscapes with contemporary buildings. Now, the people making this art, they knew exactly how old Jesus, how long ago Jesus lived. They knew quite a bit about what buildings looked like in the area because there were a lot of families that had members who went on crusade there and came back, and a lot of imagery that was very realistic from that time period. But the reason why in the 16th century, English artists chose to draw those historical and biblical images with contemporary landscapes and contemporary clothing was because they wanted the viewer to put themselves in the picture and imagine what would they do if they were an onlooker and what a saint was getting hurt, or what if they were an onlooker during this biblical story? How could they apply it to themselves? And so it wasn't because the artists were ignorant of history, it was because they wanted the viewer to feel like they could participate in that Bible story. And that's the assumption I would like you folks to make as we look at art from different time periods and different areas of the world. Make the assumption first and foremost that the artist is doing that because they're doing it on purpose. Right? If we look at, there's lots of other examples that we can talk about too, but just assume that with these equestrian riders that the person is the same size as the horse. Maybe it's not because they didn't know that people are not the same size as horses or bigger than horses. Maybe it's because for whatever kind of viewership that art is going to be received by, they are expecting the person to have a state of importance over the horse. Or maybe it's important to get the person that size so you can see all their marks of office on their body and the jewelry that the little figure wears. Does that make sense to you? Okay, good. So you're going to be looking at those. You're going to be applying the tools that you've learned and the tools that you're learning this week, which is the elements of art. And then what I want you to do is draw an 8-inch by 8-inch square on a piece of paper, and you're going to make a collage. That's your own version of the Equestrian Rider. And there are several different ways that you can do this. What I suggest is watching that video first where the person shows how to make a collage. And a collage is like an assemblage, except basically you're using just paper. And what I would recommend is finding at least 15 images, and you can download them from the internet, print them out. They can be your own images that you've taken. They can be images from magazines that you're going to be tearing out and using. I don't think that really matters. I would recommend going to a place like wikimedia.org and picking elements that are copyright free, or you can go to do a Google image search, do an advanced search, and there is an area a box that you can tick that says licensing rights and open use or free use for licensing. And those are the images that I would look for first. But the ways that you can approach this is maybe you can find 15 different photos of somebody riding a horse that's about the right size. And you tear those up and you use those 15 different photos to make a new image. And they just have parts of all these different images. Maybe another one you can do is one person of the other section suggested that they have a friend draw like an arm and use that in the collage. And you can do that. Maybe what you want to do is parts of several different people's faces and use that for the head. Maybe it's several different horses that you make for the horse. Maybe there's some sculptural photos of sculptures of horses that you use. Or maybe your approach is going to a magazine, getting some really interesting images that you can use for landscapes and sky, putting that down, and then building the horse on top of it. I would suggest thinking about tearing this out rather than cutting, but you can cut too. I mean, it doesn't really make any difference. Maybe your horse is going to be developed from you draw an outline of a horse and fill the outline in with examples of different texture. Like maybe you've gotten several different photos of human hair and you use that to make up the body of the horse. Or you find other textures that remind you of the horse. Or maybe you have an image of newspaper rock and you see expand a portion of that photo to see all the horses that were drawn on newspaper rock and tear that out and use that as a portion of the horse that you're making. So there's lots of different kinds of things that you can do to make that. But when you're done, it's going to be your version in an 8x8 square of that equestrian rider. So that done in such a way so that you can, at least for yourself and for others, you can see the links between that and the equestrian rider examples that you see from the module. Pay attention to the elements of art, pay attention to your own internal process of going through the tools of artistic critique, and use that to inform how you move forward in this. Does everybody understand? Get an idea? Okay. Do we have any questions? Okay, for people that watch this later, can you think of a question that they might have? Can you think of some different ideas that you could, or can you think of some different ideas that you would use to make your own version of an equestrian rider? What kind of images can you find?
My roommate's job is to ride horses, so I gotta ask her to take pictures of them.
That's a great idea. That's a really good idea. Now, you don't necessarily need to get pictures of a horse in the same place and position, but people riding horses and using that somehow, I think that's an awesome idea. A friend of mine is a painter named Brian Kershiznik. Do any of you know or recognize that name? He does images using or involving a lot of people, and he does it in kind of almost a primitive type style. And stuff is very interesting. But he did a painting of somebody doing a handstand, and he said when he was done painting the person, he realized that he had painted it with two left hands, and he was going to go back in and fix it, but then he thought, well, wait a sec, I like both of these left hands, and so he left it. And when he put it on display, somebody bought it because they loved the two left hands. So the point of that is, this doesn't have to be a direct one-to-one correspondence for the equestrian riders that you see, but it does need to be your own version. And I think, like Megan said, if you have a friend that does that, that's an excellent resource, Megan. I think that'll be very cool. Any other ideas?
There's a rodeo this weekend.
You go to the rodeo and get photos.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
excellent. That's a great idea. Maybe put cowboy hats on the couple images of the Dogon riders or the equestrian riders that you see. That's a great idea. All right. Any questions about any other aspect of the module or the previous modules? Okay. Yeah, somebody can take a picture of Kendall right now and use that in your equestrian rider. You will not get extra credit points nor a crisp high five, but you can do it. All right, if nobody has any other questions, that's all I have that I wanted to cover today. So I will put this up. Once again, I wanted to mention oh yes, Megan. Anybody else have a cowboy hat? Oh, if Allison has one too, that's just going to be, I don't know if that's a great thing or an awful thing. Oh no. Oh, that's horrible. That's wonderful. Yeah, maybe you can make your rider give him a human form, but make him up with just pictures of cowboy hats. That'd be interesting. I did want to mention one more time though that if you attended and Canvas is still trying to get you to submit something for the attendance assignment, just submit yes or Y and click that, and then Canvas will leave you alone. But you get the points anyway. Okay, regardless. All right. Okay. I hope you guys have a wonderful week, and I will get more online for you soon. But I look forward to seeing how these projects turn out.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much.